God of War Sons of Sparta was an easy target for mockery, and it's already among the worst rated games of the franchise. Look, I didn't want to criticize the game myself just because this childhood adventure where you pet animals doesn't really feel like your big God of War games, or because the battle system is much less energetic. Because on its own, speaking as a big nerd for pixelated Roman and Greek mythology, this game world feels like the Metroidvania setting I've always wished for. In fact, these landscapes full of ancient temples and Mediterranean hillsides feel incredibly inviting to explore, aside from the underwhelming enemy sprites which are the biggest fumble in the audiovisual design. I do think this is a decent game, even if it might be attached to the wrong franchise. But one big problem is that Sons of Sparta represents this false idea that all things are inherently in need of an overhaul, when in reality it's the quote-unquote modernization that feels backward, like reinventing the wheel. There's a reason why genre classics like Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid hold up to this day. Their design made it intuitive to explore these giant side-scrolling labyrinths on your own. They relied on player agency, engaging with the mechanics and the worlds yourself in a satisfying, non-intrusive way, which worked because these 2D platforming mechanics and light RPG elements didn't need to be overly complicated. Hollow Knight successfully picked up on that core principle. It's a concept that ideally explains itself, yet Sons of Sparta is a title that doesn't trust its players, and therefore it brought over all the open world hint systems that aren't necessary in a game like this. None of it breaks the game, but the Metroidvania genre is about intuitive exploring. It doesn't need constant pop-ups about the percentage of things you've discovered or hints about nearby secrets. But here they are in Sons of Sparta, on top of a quippy sidekick giving you instructions.
May want to make a note to circle back here if we find the right gear.
Besides that, I get it, they really want you to experience the storytelling in God of War, which has had unskippable cutscenes since the first game, but they break the gameplay flow for no good reason. The characters just aren't that interesting. Also, even though the combat and puzzle mechanics are very easy to understand, tutorials constantly interrupt the gameplay for hours. For a genre built on natural curiosity, there also are a few too many map markers, and while the map usually remains invisible until you reach one of the main quest goals, the actual layout is pretty linear. Unlike Hollow Knight, for example, there's often only one way to go, and the genre-typical path blocking feels artificial. The weirdest thing though is the controls. In the default mode you can't drop to a lower platform or grab a ladder with just the jump button, which would be the most natural option. The so-called modern version requires an extra button press, which doesn't make any sense. There's no real purpose to this decision, other than being able to claim it doesn't play like those pesky old games, I guess. So ultimately, although this game tries to mimic old school game design, it isn't brave enough to fully commit to the idea. It comes from the mistaken mindset that new games should never have friction or learning curves. Even though the massive success of Hollow Knight Silksong shows that players are still up to the task. The same goes for Elden Ring when we are talking about 3D games. When it comes to atmosphere, Sons of Sparta is better than some people make it out to be, at least if you share my appreciation for Greek mythology in a 2D retro-looking format. Besides the backdrops, the soundtrack is pretty well made too, and it further carries the mood. It doesn't have the flashiest moment-to-moment gameplay, but it's decent. However, it needed at least one or two other elements that felt above average to truly stick out. Think of the intense platforming and battle system found in a game like Prince of Persia: Lost Crown, which actually keeps up with 3D games when it comes to complexity. So ultimately, in Sons of Sparta, it's the focus on this mishmash of unnecessary AAA tropes that holds it back. Anyway, don't hesitate to leave your own opinions and hot takes about Sons of Sparta down below, and if you found any of this babbling interesting, why not leave a like or use the hype button. Thanks for watching.